Well, I am super excited to be joined by a longtime colleague, Naomi Grewal, who's had just an amazing career in the market research and market intelligence field. And I really appreciate your time, Naomi, for talking with us. Let's go ahead and get started. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the exciting world of market research?
Sure. Yeah. I majored in psychology in undergrad. I went on and did a master's degree and a PhD at Claremont Graduate University. So really started with an academic background in psychology, similar to yourself.
Yeah, very much.
And then I kind of started on the vendor side of research, first at a startup and then at Ipsos, where you and I actually met.
Yeah.
And started applying, a lot of the research methods and statistical skills that I was learning from my dissertation and from my academic background, and really seeing the more immediate effect of that in industry, in the market research industry. So I really enjoyed that. And once I got into it, I just kind of kept doing it, I started really getting interested in research management, so leading various research teams, and started doing that at Ipsos, and then sort of had a series of career moves where I've just moved up into new management roles. I've spent probably the last 8 years in the technology industry, some of those jobs that you mentioned. So I've been at Facebook twice, Pinterest, Uber, and I'm now the director of research at Workday. What's sort of unique about my career is that I've actually worked on every side of research. And by that, I mean, much broader than just a market researcher. That is sort of most of my background. I say most of my background is really in market research and consumer insights. But in those last 8 years or so, I have moved from market research and consumer insights into people research or studying employees.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Oh my.
Siri wants to know more about that.
Siri wants to know. Anyway, studying the human resources side of research and studying the employees at Uber. I also did a little bit at Facebook. So more like internal focused research. And then more recently focused on the user experience side of research. So understanding how we build products, really getting embedded into product development, design. And so the last 3 or 4 years of my experience have been more focused in user experience type of research. I think what's really cool about Workday right now is we're actually building a centralized research organization where eventually the goal would be to have all the different types of research kind of informing one another, and building that up internally.
Interesting. I've heard of more of that happening on the client side these days, of trying to bring together, used to be research was very siloed. You had your user experience team and your market research team, and then your people research team. So I've heard that there's been more of that kind of integration going on.
Yep, absolutely. And I love research. I love managing research teams. Again, it's kind of all I've ever done, but it's really all I ever want to do as well.
Oh, that's great. And we have been kind of, living parallel professional lives, starting out in psychology and academia, and then going to the vendor side, and then experiencing the wild and wacky world of startups for all the pros and cons in that. But then you've leapt over to the client side and experienced different kinds of research. That's a leap that I didn't take, but it sounds really interesting. Like, how would you characterize the differences in being on the vendor side versus the client side?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're on the vendor side of research, you focus much more on the research. I think it's great early in your career when you're really learning the nuts and bolts of what it takes to actually produce really high quality research. What really fascinated me about the move to the client side, and initially I was really concerned about only researching one thing, going to Facebook and only getting to work on what does Facebook think or what does Facebook do. But in reality, what I found was the questions are really diverse, really broad, and you end up doing a lot more than just research. So much of it is building relationships with cross-functional partners, understanding priorities. I felt like my role really expanded and grew in a lot of the ways that I found really challenging and engaging when I moved over to the client side. So I've really enjoyed that. The other thing that is sort of parallel between us is we've now both returned to academia a little bit. So, so I was just mentioning to Steve that I am starting as a professor at USC, just adjuncting, so just being a lecturer in an applied psychology program.
Yeah, working with students is great. It's really engaging. They're excited. They're enthusiastic. I get that through, I teach at University of San Francisco, but also through my role at MRII. We're all about offering continuing education courses. And it's just really gratifying. And you really see also, kind of the inflection point in people's careers when you help people get that their first big job or that next big job. You just see the excitement. You see how that change in the trajectory of their career makes a really big impact.
Yep, that is like the most rewarding thing for me. It's why I love managing people. It's seeing people's careers take off, and for me it's all about giving back too. Like I just love being able to contribute to the industry now.
Yeah, so what kind of career advice do you give to students and younger career professionals on your teams?
Yeah, so I mean, what I would tell young professionals is really focus on what you're really passionate about. For me, that was psychology. I felt a lot of pressure externally and maybe parental and other forms of pressure to do other things, other fields. And I kind of brushed those ideas off and really said, I'm going to try to make a career out of this psychology thing, and just trust me, I'll figure it out. And I think over time, if you really focus on something you really love, that gives you a certain amount of drive and intrinsic motivation that tends to yield success overall. I think my other piece of advice for young professionals is networking broadly. I think something that I did well earlier in my career was attending industry conferences, getting to know big players in the industry and in market research, in tech. And that really helped me long term. I was able to create a name for myself. I was able to, know the right people. And that really matters in your career longer term, make those relationships.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on, how people get jobs, and so many jobs come through networking and personal connections. And yes, you can send off a resume to that job application you found online along with, a couple of hundred other people, and people do get jobs that way. But boy, the power of those connections, like you're saying, is really, really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also like the point that you made about, kind of doing something that you're really passionate about. A lot of times I tell people, find your passion, and you hear that advice all the time. And then I tell them, find your passion in a growing field.
Yeah.
So, there was a period of time in my career when I felt, gee, I'm not really taking that advice, because I was doing a lot of very traditional survey-based kind of research. And there's definitely still a place for that. But there was all this growth going on in digital data and clickstream data. And I was like, I really want to get into that. And and that's a growing field. Or UX is a hot growing field, and that sounds like a field that you may not have had a whole lot of experience in originally, but now you're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think, related to sort of like trends in market research and the research industry broadly, I think that's a really excellent point. At least in the technology industry, there is a massive shift towards like user experience research teams and understanding users and how they use products. And that's really evolved over the last 10 years or so. And so there's actually, I would say UX research teams are much larger than market research teams in the technology industry. And so I personally think, the core skills of a researcher can be applied across different types of research. It's really just understanding the slightly different language and the stakeholder that you're kind of doing research for. And that can change based on where you sit within an organization, but that's something that you can really learn. So really try to understand the business context, and get really strong at those core research skills, but you can really transition, I find, across types of research.
Yeah. If you look at the job listings at Google and Meta and places like that, you'll see a ton of listings now for user experience researchers, which you hadn't seen before. And I very much agree with what you're saying, that it's a lot of core basic research skills. How do you figure out what the problem is? How do you operationalize those things? How do you draw conclusions from the research? But there is kind of a different language. I remember not long ago, I decided, oh, well, you know what? I need to get up to speed in some of the new things in the field. So I'm going to take a class on machine learning because I have like a strong background in statistics, but yeah, I don't really know anything about this new field. Well, it turns out so much of machine learning is like traditional research methods and statistics. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, gee, I don't know what a cost function is. Oh, it turns out it's a regression. I know what a regression is.
Right, exactly. Getting good at the basics, and you hear about these trends, machine learning or data science, or all these sort of fancy terms. But in reality, if you just understand some really strong basics, like statistics and regression in particular, almost everything is a regression to some extent. So yeah, I think understanding those basics is really critical.
Yeah, agreed. Well, we have just a couple minutes left. I wanted to ask you, you're a board member of MRII, Market Research Institute International, and the executive director. Just tell me a little bit about how you got involved with MRII and how you see the value of that organization in the field.
Yeah, I've been involved with MRII for almost 6 years now. So it's been quite some time. And for me, it's really about giving back again to the research industry. So I am a very busy person juggling multiple jobs and young kids. So I try to contribute wherever I possibly can, whether it's interacting with you or joining various committees. But I originally got started actually through a relationship, again, like networking, someone that I knew who had joined MRII and was part of the committee looking for new members. And so I got introduced to MRII that way. And yeah, through a variety of conversations, joined the board, started working on first the marketing committee, and now a variety of other committees. And it's been really a wonderful way to get to know other leaders in the industry, really commit to education broadly. And for me, again, it's really just about finding those opportunities to share my experience and really give back.
That sounds great. Well, we really appreciate all your time that you contribute to the board, and I really appreciate the time you contributed here today. Thanks so much.
Of course. So great to chat with you.
Yeah, it's always great catching up with you, Naomi. Thanks so much. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Take care.
Take care.